Volcanic eruptions are hot work, especially on an August afternoon, and little Eddie and the boys had worked up a thirst. They headed inside to find their mom chatting over a cup of coffee with the minister. Each one grabbed a chipped cup or an old mason jar and filled it from the sink. They dropped into chairs around the kitchen table and tried not to interrupt. But it didn't last long. Baby Gray got restless and toddled out onto the back porch. In a minute, he toddled back in. He pulled on his mama's sleeve and looked anxiously up into her face. "Mama," he said, "Smoke in the window." "Honey," said his mother, "don't interrupt me when I'm talking to the preacher." Well, Gray was an obedient little boy. He didn't interrupt any more, but he wandered back out to the porch. When the preacher had finished his coffee and said his goodbyes, the boy's mother stepped out on the back porch to collect laundry from the wringer washer. In less than a second, the door banged open, and she yelled, "Smoke! There's smoke coming out of the attic window!" Little Eddie and the boys stampeded through the door and looked up at the attic window. Sure enough, there was a thick cloud of dark smoke pouring through the upstairs window. Immediately, little Eddie grabbed the bucket that was lying beside the volcano and headed back into the kitchen. It seemed to take forever to fill at the sink, but finally he dashed to the door to the attic steps and he jerked it open. A blast of heat struck him in the face, and he stared into a roiling holocaust of flame. With a heave, he flung the bucket of water up the stairway, but it only sizzled. A tongue of fire began to spread across the yellowed wallpaper of the kitchen ceiling. Forget the attic. It was now every man for himself. Little Eddie ran to the boys' bedroom. They all shared a dresser, and Eddie's clothes were in the top drawer. He didn't have time to run down the hall. Every second was precious, so he grabbed a chair and did something he'd always wanted to do. He threw it right through the window. His drawer, full of clothes, followed close behind. But just as he was reaching for Scotty's drawer, he remembered his new fishing pole. He couldn't let it burn up. Meanwhile, Scotty had run to the living room and was selflessly rescuing the set of Encyclopedia Britannica, one armload at a time. Neighbors began to gather. A young Marine, home on furlough, and another gentleman hauled the Steinway upright piano through the front doors, manhandled it down the stairs, and left it propped against one of the large maple trees by the gate. Little Eddie's figured his dad might have done it himself, but he was at a meeting in Charleston for the day. Burning chunks of ceiling began to drop into the hallway, and the tar paper on the roof had become a black Niagara Falls. The boys' mom refused to let them go back inside. A fire truck had been called from Whitesville, 20 miles away, and by the time it arrived, the back half of the house was ablaze. Firemen leapt out and cranked up the pump on their tanker truck. They began to direct a steady stream of water onto the roof. More neighbors arrived. Little Eddie added to the festive occasion by sitting down at the piano and playing ragtime music. Everything appeared to be under control. Until the tanker truck went dry. The firemen glanced about, but they weren't surprised not to find a hydrant in Rockcastle Holler. No problem. They were prepared. In a moment, 2 burly firemen were lugging a portable pump down the hill, through the strawberry patch, across the railroad tracks to the riverbank. They connected a hose, and in minutes, a fresh stream of water was being directed to the roof, or what was left of it. Eddie started to play again. Just then, a far-off sound reached their ears. It was strangely familiar. Following the direction of the sound, their eyes went down the hill, through the strawberry patch, to the railroad tracks. That's what makes a noise like that. A train whistle. Sure enough, the 5:15 train, loaded with over 100 cars of coal, was barreling down the stretch. Then everyone's eyes followed the fire hose as it went down the hill, through the strawberry patch, and across the railroad tracks. Well, there's no way to stop a fully loaded coal train traveling at 50 miles an hour in less than a mile and a half. Certainly not before it ran over the fire hose, slicing it cleanly in two. On one side of the tracks, the cut hose thrashed about, spraying water in all directions. On the other side, the fireman directing the nozzle watched his stream of water die away to nothing. Any hopes to save the house died with it. By the time the hose was spliced, the house was gone. 6 steps climbed bravely to where the front porch had been and gave way to a smoking ash heap. The chimney stood sadly off to one side. A kind neighbor lady put her arm around the boy's mother, invited them to walk down the hill to her house for some supper. No one was home when little Eddie's father arrived. He pulled up to the empty lot where his home had been. There was a piano under the maple tree, but that was about it. Getting out of the car, he followed the walkway to the front steps. He circled the ash heap, passing the chimney. He made his way to the backyard and saw something that puzzled him. There, not 20 feet from the smoldering remains of his home, was a small volcano, purple lava, still cooling on its sides. He looked back at the ashes of his home and then turned to stare again at the volcano. He scratched his head in wonder. Could it be? Could it really be?